sure that we got that. Hang on. I'll start in just a minute. Yep. Okay. Looks like everybody has muted their phones. We've all got pretty good at this, the Google Meets and everything in the last 3 years. So this is nice that we're able to start off without having a lot of technical difficulties. In the chat function, we would like to ask you to list your name and the firm that you're representing. That will be helpful for us to know who has participated in the webinar and to know who we may need to reach out to make sure that they get access to the online tools. We will also be monitoring the chat box, so please send us any messages or questions as you think of them during the webinar. We'll use this function at the end for questions, and you'll also be able to unmute and ask questions at the end as well. So this webinar will cover Wyoming Water Development Office GIS data collection and management standards. Our office initiated this effort in 2016 to improve management of GIS data, which is developed for level 1 and level 2 planning projects. We worked with a multi-agency steering group to identify core data sets that are key to the business needs of our agency, as well as our other agencies. From our perspective, the core GIS data supports understanding of water use, water supply, and water project feasibility. Again, we appreciate your participation today, even if you have attended previous webinars, as this provides an opportunity for questions you may have as you've worked with the standards previously. And also, as we've implemented the standards, we do a little bit of fine tuning every year. So there might be a few things that have changed. Currently, we are still using version 3.1 for the technical memo, and we have changed the templates to version 3.2. So if you download those templates previously, you'll need to grab the new ones for your projects this year. So just an overview of what we'll cover today is we'll talk about the current GIS standards, where you can access templates and tools, provide you with tips so that you can have successful data deliverables, and then provide an opportunity for questions and answers. So in regards to the GIS standards, we'll jump right into this first, since following the standards will ensure the spatial data that you collect during your project is compiled so that deliverables provide the data in the correct format the first time, so we don't have to have resubmittals, because that takes a lot of everybody's time. So to follow the standards, it is important to note and understand the spatial data requirements in the contract specifications. If the prime project manager has not shared the contract with the GIS person, it would be good to do that, because there is specific language in that contract regarding what is needed for the GIS. Also, we'll talk about the core data, also known as the data that you need to compile for your project. And then we'll share resources to help ensure that the core data sets meet our standards. So this is a little bit of a busy slide, but it's things that are directly out of the contract and the notice to proceed letter. So again, the spatial data requirements are outlined in contract specifications under scope of services under C2B. Again, we recommend that the contract be shared with the people who will be doing the GIS. So under the first section talks about feature mapping. And includes language stating that the consultant shall acquire the appropriate geodatabase template for feature mapping from the geospatial hub prior to completing GIS work. We recommend that you download and use the templates early on to avoid having to retrofit your data into the templates at the end of your project. And also early on, talk to your your Water Development Office program manager about your GIS plan, and if you have any questions with using the templates and that type of thing. There are 5 different geodatabase templates available, and they'll be specific to your project type, whether it's a watershed study, a master plan, or an in-stream flow study. The templates provide the organization and naming requirements for feature classes, tables, and the required attributes within the feature classes. The contract also talks about core data and auxiliary data. Core data are those features which fit into one of the Wyoming Water Development Office feature classes in the Geodatabase template. And these data are required whether you are collecting them from another source, whether you are digitizing them, or whether you're collecting them in the field. All core data needs to be loaded into the Geodatabase template and attributed according to the GIS standards. The core data have a subset of fields, which are highlighted here, that are required. The contract number, the primary consultant, date modified, and horizontal accuracy. To find the contract number can be a little bit tricky because it is assigned after the consultant has signed the contract. So unless your project manager sends you that fully executed contract, you may not see that contract number on the contract, but it is in the header, the title of the contract, and it begins with the CM number. It should not be confused with the RN number. Another place where you can find your contract number is in your notice to proceed letter, and you all should have those in hand at this point. The other thing the contract discusses are auxiliary data sets. And auxiliary data sets are features that don't fit into the Geodatabase templates. This might include things like photos. Maybe you did a seepage study and identified seepage areas and digitized polygons that don't fit into one of our core feature classes. Or if for potential projects, if you mapped conveyances or future conveyances or polygons for potential projects, those could be auxiliary data sets. The auxiliary data can be linked to the templates or managed separately as needed for project completion. Auxiliary data sets can be submitted as shapefiles, and metadata, again, is required. So the next section on the contract talks about the formats and standards. Here we address metadata. Again, metadata are required for the Geodatabase file for each included feature class, including those obtained from another source, and for each newly created feature. And the GIS Technical Memorandum has a lot of information on requirements for submitting metadata. Coordinate system is also defined in the contract, and specifically it is GCS North American 1983. And finally, the last section, section 3 in the contract, addressed maps and mapping. So the GIS deliverables should be organized in a way as to allow easy replication of the maps found in the final project reports. The GIS project files can be provided as either Esri ArcGIS MXD files or ArcPro APRX files. We want you to make sure that you save them with the relative path names to the data sources so that the project files open up easily. Please keep in mind as you're working in the GIS, what version of ArcGIS your sponsor uses when saving your MXD or your project files to make sure that those are compatible if they have GIS on their end. So in the introduction, I mentioned our goal of modernizing and standardizing the data, which is being collected as part of water development projects. As we reviewed the contract language, the concept of core data sets was introduced. The framework for the core data sets in the templates is based on the common sets of data gathered during water development projects. The framework identified 4 categories of data, or 4 data sets. So the assessment data set organizes data related to water use, changes over time, and ground conditions such as irrigated lands. Included here are mapping, again, of the irrigated lands, and then also Roskin classification. The hydrology data set only includes one feature class, and that is streamflow, which includes information on both measured and modeled streamflow data. The water projects data set includes the study area boundary and tracks potential projects. So this would be new projects that are identified in the study, and how these potential projects fit within our funding programs. Finally, the water systems data set contains all kinds of information on the existing built environment, including where the conveyances are, where structures such as water tanks or wells are located, and also reservoirs. So this is the existing network to distribute water. And not only does it include the built environment, but it also includes information on water rights. So only a subset of these feature classes will be required for your specific project. And this will be described in a few minutes when we share how to access the templates. So again, the contract lays out what to do for your project GIS, and we have developed several resources, including this webinar, to help you know how to develop the data sets. So I mentioned before the GIS technical memo. Much of what you will need to know about data delivery and development can be found in the tech memo. We did not change this year, so if you have the one from 2021, you won't need to make another copy. So the document includes an introduction, which has tips and recommendations for developing your GIS. It talks about the metadata and coordinate system. It describes the 5 sections required for complete metadata and includes examples for you. There's also a section on the templates, the tools, and base layers. This outlines the tools you will need for developing your GIS project. The Geodatabase section provides download instructions for the map packages for your project. There is also discussion on utilizing the ePermit, place of use, and point of diversion conversion tools. These are 2 data sets where statewide downloads were exported by our office between 2018 and 2019. And your Water Development Office project manager can help you to get this pre-populated data set if it is needed for your project. This section on the tools will be helpful for understanding how that ePermit data was downloaded, how to use it, and how to update the data since it's now 3+ years old. The tech memo also describes base layers that can be used to provide a consistent base for developing core data sets, such as the NHD, also includes flow lines and streamlines. The bulk of the standards describes the data model, core GIS data sets, and provides detail on the types of GIS features normally collected through Water Development Office projects under the features and mapping and attributes section. And so that includes about half of the document. The other half of the document includes appendices, which we hope that you find helpful. Appendix A is very important. It will be important for setting up your project GIS. It includes the domain definitions, which are included as drop-downs in the map package templates, and definitions for those domains. Appendix B was provided by the State Engineer's Office and includes guidelines for using the ePermit database. Appendix C includes the instructions for downloading the point of use and point of diversion data, the ePermit data. And then finally, the Appendix D describes the linking fields for linking between conveyances and structures. Again, this document is designed to help you provide the deliverables which meet contract specifications and do not require resubmittal. So all of the templates, tools, and training materials are available by navigating to the URL here, and we'll make this presentation available after today. And selecting by selecting GIS data and standards from the office's homepage. So this is a screenshot of where many of these resources are located. So the first block of resources on our web page includes links to the GIS technical memo, also includes links to a geodatabase diagram, which I'll go into more detail on in the next slide. The consultant orientation will be posted there, including the slides and this recorded webinar. The GIS framework plan is from 2018, and this just provides some of the background, the gap analysis, and recommendations for data modernization that our standards are based upon. And then all of the past presentations are also available on the website if you have any desire to go back and look at those. But we've archived them there. So I do want to just circle back and talk about the geodatabase diagram. Looks pretty busy, but it's a really, really great tool to either have available electronically or print on large format paper. This is a schematic that includes all of the feature classes in blue and the associated tables in gold. All of the fields in every feature class are listed, so it's really helpful to just have that one-stop shop to view all of that. Also, you can see a few little red marks there. That indicates those fields that are domains and have drop-down values. The linkages, again, between the feature classes and the tables are shown on the table as well. And just as a side note, this was developed in 2020. We have not updated it. So you may see some subtle changes between this and your geodatabase templates that you use. So speaking of geodatabase templates, those are available from download on the website as well. So on the right side of this slide is the catalog tree that shows all of the core data sets or feature classes. And this is a master data set, so it includes all of the feature classes. Again, not all projects will include or require all of the listed feature classes. So as I mentioned, not all projects will require all of the feature classes. This is a screenshot from the technical memo of the feature classes that are required for an irrigation district master plan. So as an example, the irrigation master plans include 8 out of the 15 core feature classes. Let's see, and just as another note, the feature classes that are required for all projects include study area, potential projects, place of use from e-permit, and then also conveyances. So to download the geodatabase templates, it's pretty simple, and I think people are working more and more with these and becoming familiar with them. They're available in map packages by project type or study type. So on the right side of the screen, you can view the 5 different map packages. Your template from the extracted map package will only include the feature classes from the geodatabase which are relevant to your project. So there are a couple of ways to open and use the map packages after downloading them from the website. You can double-click the map package, and the map package will automatically open up and extract itself to your C users folder, and then automatically open ArcMap. You can also run the extract package tool in ArcToolbox from either ArcMap or ArcCatalog. This will allow the map package to be extracted to a user-defined location rather than just defaulting to your C users. So the path and all the instructions for this are on page 8 of the tech memo. So So the last set of resources on the website include the common base data sets that were discussed previously that provide consistent base for development of the core data sets. Included here are boundaries, streams and water bodies from the NHD, and stream names and divisions and district boundaries from the Wyoming State Engineer's Office. And then the ArcGIS tools currently include the ePermit GIS conversion tool and the required public land system survey layers that are used with that ePermit tool. So implementation of the standards has brought to light where we can fine-tune our processes. We're excited to be building the statewide data sets with your project data and by going back and mining previous project data. We've learned a lot in working with the incoming data sets, and I'll pass this off to Mike Robertson, who will share some of those things that we have learned to help you with your GIS submittals.
Okay, thanks, Mabel. So you've heard now from Mabel about the resources that we have prepared for you to generate deliverables that meet our standards. I think for the most part, we've seen that everyone is following our standards now pretty well since they've been in place for a few years. We do believe that the resources we provide help make our expectations clear and help you get everything right the first time. But we do still see some errors that result in returning draft GIS data for corrections. And hopefully the hour or so you're spending with us today can help save some of that some time down the road. So let's cover a few items that may help as you're preparing the GIS data for our office. Each year we emphasize these 9 tips, and I'll mention them again this year. You'll find them on pages 2 and 3 of the Standards Tech Memo. The one I like to highlight as you begin to work on your project is to use the correct project template. As Mabel mentioned, we have several different templates for different project types, so be sure you know what project type yours is. We do strongly recommend starting with this template and then creating new data, when creating new data, rather than planning to load the data from your customized project into the template later. That will avoid a lot of potential headaches. If you choose to set up your own database first, and then migrate into our format later, you may end up doing more work and have mismatch in attributes that we include in our template. Be sure to check in with questions. Mabel and I are always happy to help. We do prefer that you work with your water development project manager first, but we are a resource for both of you. Keep in mind that if you do have a change in personnel with GIS responsibilities for your project, the new person can always review this recorded webinar and documents, and we're also happy to work through questions one-on-one as needed. Okay, when the GIS data is submitted as part of your draft reporting, it will go to your water development project manager first, and they're going to pull out a checklist to fill out. And these are the major points that they will focus on. First, they're going to look at whether the correct template was used, and the way that will be evaluated is to compare the actual versus expected core feature classes and tables. So all of the feature classes in your template are supposed to be populated with data for your project. However, there may be some instances where you do not include data for a specific feature class. Your project manager should be aware of this, and there should be an understanding between you why these data are not included. You will still need to turn in that feature class as part of the Geodatabase with your deliverables and include an explanation in the metadata for why that particular data set is blank. Next, they're going to look at does each core feature class have all of the attributes and only the appropriate attributes? Again, not all of the attributes included in the template feature class will be populated in every case, but the majority should be. Project managers will be looking for an explanation if important data attributes are blank. Historically, not much data was included in attributes with GIS features, but instead just referenced in reports. And we want the data to have a broader audience and be used for more than just this project. So we really want to attach as much attribute data to these spatial features as possible. Next up, they're going to look at metadata and see if all of that is included. I'll talk a bit more about that on the next slide, but metadata is definitely a critical component of our expectations. Next, did you submit as a geodatabase? Although we provide the templates as a map package, we actually prefer that the deliverables not be returned in that format, but as a geodatabase. Working with map package, although it seems pretty straightforward, it does add a couple of extra steps, and not all of our project managers have a lot of GIS experience. So you are also welcome to include ArcMap or ArcPro package if you would like to. And then finally, be sure that all maps are prepared for the report are submitted as a separate map file, and you can either use MXD or APRX. We've updated the wording in the contract to indicate that either is acceptable. Metadata is a big deal and a critical reason for the adoption of our standards in the first place. Anyone working with GIS knows how frustrating it is to get or find a data set with no metadata and then try and figure out whether it's current or even usable. Nearly all of our older GIS data sets are lacking this critical information. When the GIS standards were created, we focused on the most important pieces rather than requiring the full FGDC compliant metadata in order to balance the value with the effort that it requires. Although it's critically important to have this information, we didn't want it to be a huge burden. We just need information on the 5 sections within the ArcGIS item description format. So there are several places where you can find out exactly what we're looking for as far as metadata. In section 2.1 of the standards technical memo, you'll find the table shown here on the left that outlines each section and the components in that section. There's also a detailed example on page 5 of the tech memo filled out for a hypothetical data set so you can get a better sense of what goes where. Then we've carried this over into the templates themselves by including both prompts for what to include in brackets and some example text. Just make sure you replace the example text with your actual metadata. In previous years, we commented that metadata required for the Geodatabase file and the feature data sets, but these are actually already pre-populated with the necessary data, so you really only need to update metadata for the feature classes and tables. So now let's take a look at the 5 sections. The tags section is largely pre-populated, but you are free to add any more terms if you think they would be helpful. The use limitations default language should be really all you need in most cases, but you are, again, welcome to add any language that you feel is necessary. Just make sure you don't delete or edit any of the default language that we have in there. The credit section is pretty straightforward. So really that just leaves the summary and description sections that require a bit more work on your part. But these still should be pretty straightforward with the example information that we have provided. I want to point out the highlighted, the yellow portion of the description section here on this slide. If you have added a linked table with extra attributes, we want you to spell out any of those data attributes right here in the description section. This is especially true for any coded values that you may have used, and be sure to provide a definition for those so that the next person to look at it knows what the attributes actually represent. If there are no linked tables, you can just go ahead and delete this statement from your deliverable. One problem that some consultants run into is that they acquire data from another source, but unfortunately it doesn't have any metadata. So the first thing you have to do is make sure you trust the accuracy of that data, since the whole point of metadata is to ensure validity. You'll need to verify the quality of the data set and see if you can find any metadata from the source. If you still can't find any metadata, explain where you got it from, when you acquired the data, and then go ahead and acknowledge that despite your best efforts, you weren't able to track down any of the original metadata. We ask that you please take some time to do a good job with your metadata. We are relying on you to give us the info that we need to keep these data sets useful to future users. Our project managers aren't necessarily going to vet all of the details that you provide. They're really just verifying that the proper sections are populated. So if you give sparse metadata, that it just isn't going to be very useful. We took quite a bit of time to build an example into every feature class and table, so the prompts are right there when you go to fill it out. So hopefully it is clear what the level of effort is that we're expecting. In addition to metadata for the feature classes and tables, we also need metadata for individual features or records. That usually includes 4 fields, although sometimes the horizontal accuracy is not required. Whenever these fields are present, they are not optional. They do need to be populated. So you saw earlier in the presentation from Mabel where to find the project contract ID number. Contractor is intended to be the firm who creates and or edits the feature, and that could either be the prime consultant or subcontractor. Creation edit date, we opted not to maintain both creator and editor fields so that we could try and cut down on the number of required fields. So the creator will first populate this field with each new record, and then if at a later date someone comes along and makes a change to an individual feature, then they will change this field to reflect the edit date for the new condition. And horizontal accuracy, this is a coded value domain, so be sure to review the tech memo for which code is appropriate for each feature. We have had some questions in the past about this one because they are categories, and specifically the accuracy that's assigned to each of the categories. So just note that we chose the 3 main types of GPS receivers consistent with USGS standards. We indicate the accuracy that is typically expected from the type of GPS unit, but ultimately you will have to make the call as to which type of receiver applies to the data that were collected for each feature. One of our 9 tips is to assign an edit time and date to only those features that you change. One good way to do this without having to manually change each record is to enable editor tracking. Many of you are probably familiar with this feature, and it's a great way to ensure both the contractor and creation edit date fields are updated. But just caution to be careful using this feature, because anytime you make a wholesale change to the entire layer, for instance, if you do a copy and paste, it will update the editor field for all of the features. So my recommendation is to keep the editor tracking off until you begin to make changes to individual features. Turn it on temporarily and then back off again when you're done with those changes. So this will help clearly distinguish which individual features have actually been changed in some way from those that were a result of a basic processing action applied to all of the features. So in a perfect world, we have devised a template that has exactly all of the correct attributes for each feature class and to match the data you have for your project. And you'll be able to quickly assign the data from your project one-to-one to the appropriate attributes. However, you are likely to have some data that don't match up exactly with the attributes in the template. And so there's also often some uncertainty about what to do in this situation. Please do not add any extra attributes directly into the template feature classes. So the correct way to handle extra data attributes will differ depending on whether you're working with core or auxiliary data layers. With auxiliary data, there aren't any template layers, so all of the data fall outside of our predefined data attributes. Feature classes and tables will follow whatever format you feel is best suited to organize these data. You can submit them in the same template geodatabase as a separate feature class or table, or you can keep all of these data separate and submit it as a distinct geodatabase. Or if you like, you can just submit it as a standalone shapefile if that works best. Remember, though, that we do need to have metadata for all of the auxiliary data sets. With core data, the requirements are more specific. You should not include any extra attributes in the feature class outside of the predefined attributes. If there's not an appropriate attribute that corresponds to your data already in the feature class, check with one of the pre-designed data tables next. And the geodatabase diagram is really helpful for this circumstance. If you don't see an appropriate attribute in either the feature class or an existing table, then you'll need to create a project-specific table to house these data. You'll see that here on the right indicated with the arrow. You link this new table back to the feature class using an appropriate join ID. You don't have to create a relationship class with this table. In fact, we have designed the entire model to work with just a basic ArcGIS license, which does not allow relationship classes, but you must ensure that the table and the feature class have the correct attribute values to enable the join or relate. And then remember to populate the metadata for the table, including information on attributes that you added and any coded values that you may have used. So here is an example of this in action. We have one of the feature classes from our model in blue. It's the WWDO conveyance feature class with information on canals, ditches, pipelines, etc. The convey ID field is the unique identifier, and there's a set of other attributes that are also included in the feature class. You add your unique attributes into the project-specific table and assign names for these, but you need to make sure you include that convey ID in the table to facilitate the link back to the appropriate feature in the feature class. This table includes the standard fields to track the origin of the data, including the contract ID, contractor, creation edit date, and you'll also indicate which feature class it links to in one of the attributes. So it's a bit more work to organize the data this way compared to just tacking on the extra attributes into the existing feature class, but we do it this way because it's very important that our template feature classes remain in the same format, so data can be easily compiled into the master geodatabase. We do want to retain all important data that is not already built into the schema, and so this is the best way to keep these extra data attributes associated with feature classes. Our templates have names for each feature class and table that match the master geodatabase where these data will ultimately be compiled. So you may have your own project naming conventions, but we want the data deliverables to keep the same names for feature classes and tables as they are in the template that you're starting from. The one exception to this is that project-specific table that we just talked about in the previous couple of slides. In the template, it has a generic name because it could be used to link data to any feature class. But you'll need to rename that table in a way that identifies the feature class and data type along with the project name and the year of the project. So you can see an example of that here in this slide. The naming convention is spelled out in the pre-populated metadata, so you can find those details there as well when you create one of these tables. Keeping the same names also extends to the individual attributes. If the attributes or column headings differ in your deliverable, it's going to make the process of loading data in the master a lot more difficult. Your data may be called something different, but please keep the attribute names that we have in our templates and load your data into them. If you need to add some explanation about the differences in names or anything else, please add it to the description section of the metadata for that feature class or table. Obviously, the field types need to be the same as well as what it is in the template. If you feel your data needs to be a text or a number or field or vice versa, then you'll either have to adapt your data to fit the template or you will have to move that attribute into a project-specific table. In two of our feature classes, structures and conveyances, we have created our own unique identifying field. The other feature classes already have natural unique identifiers such as the NHD reach code, but there wasn't any good existing identifier for these data types. These IDs are the WWDO and the convey ID fields for structures and conveyances respectively. These fields have to be populated by you for each feature that you add. Creating the data for this field is pretty straightforward. What you do is assign an ID value that includes your contract ID and a sequential number for successive records. Be sure to review the most recent GIS Tech Memo to make sure you assign these numbers correctly. I believe it's Appendix B. And I will note that the contract ID number format has changed slightly between 2020 and 2021, but it does not affect how you create these values. You still use the same process. Finally, I have a few miscellaneous items to talk about. Make sure you find out if the project sponsor uses GIS already and find out what version they use. Our office is always up to date with the latest version of ArcMap and ArcPro, so you can deliver the products to us in the latest version. However, if your sponsor uses an earlier version, you'll want to make sure to save the files in the format of the earlier version for the project sponsor's benefit. And that brings up another point about sponsors who use GIS. This webinar has been all about standards and formats for that the water development requires in order to compile statewide data sets. However, sponsors may use a different format and a set of standards. We want the products you create to be useful to the sponsor while also meeting our standards. For auxiliary data sets, that's no problem. Just make the format fit the sponsor's needs, since the water development allows auxiliary data to be submitted in any format. But if you're working with any of the core data sets, you may need to provide the data in a format that most benefits the sponsor while also providing the data in the water development format. So this may actually require you to submit 2 sets of core data layers, depending on your project situation. Potential projects are compiled as points. Mabel mentioned it earlier, but if you are working with potential projects that are line features, you'll need to create a point layer using the first point in each line. And if you're working with potential projects that are polygons, create a point layer from the centroids. Please submit the original data, the lines and polygon features, since those are important spatial features to identify the project accurately. But in order for us to compile our single statewide layer of potential projects for the master, we want 1 single point feature class of the potential projects. You may want to separate some of the features into multiple types like valves, meters, hydrants, etc. But in our model, we've consolidated these distinct feature types into a single layer of structures. So you'll need to also consolidate them for your GIS deliverable and distinguish the various types using our attributes. It's worth mentioning again that the contract language provides clear guidance on what deliverables are required, such as map files for each map you created for the report and other details. So be sure to review this carefully and contact one of us if there are any questions or confusion. And then finally, I wanted to put one more plug in on that Geodatabase diagram where you can see the descriptions of each of the attributes in the feature class and tables. So if, for instance, you aren't sure what the development type attribute actually refers to, if you have a look there, you can see a description that can help you put the right data in the right fields. So at this point, I'll say thank you for participating in the webinar. We hope that it will help you generate and submit the deliverables correctly the first time. We will be happy to answer any questions that may have come in via chat, although I'm thinking we don't have any. Once we work through those, we'll give you a chance to raise your hand and unmute yourself and ask your questions that way. And of course, we understand that there's a lot, so you may have questions that come up later after you've digested all of this and reviewed all of the supporting materials. So we're happy to address those questions later as they come up as well. Here is the contact information for Mabel and me. Tony Bergantino with Words was also listed, and he's been a huge contributor to the development and maintenance of the Geodatabase model. And then Words, including his staff, can also help with any info on previous reports.
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, but feel free to unmute, and if you have any questions or if you want to offer any experience that you have had implementing the standards on previous projects, we'd love to hear from you. Also, are there any questions in the room?
We're gonna get off easy here. No questions. All right. Well, like I said, you're free to reach out to us if you get underway and realize that something doesn't make sense or you have some question that come up. So don't hesitate to do that. But like I say, work with your project manager first, and then we'll be happy to get involved as needed.
Hey, thank you everyone for your time today. Great to see faces briefly. Oh. All right. Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. All right. So
We're gonna end the recording.
yeah, we do need to do